Hey guys, in this video I am going to cover some of the highlights that you need to know for Module 3. So you should by this point see all of these items open just like they are in any other module I've opened so far. I've got the lesson content and learning activities page open. We're going to concentrate on a few things on here. You can see that we're going to be working through chapter 4 and 5 and following a similar format as we've done so far. You're going to be working on tasks through these chapters that are going to help you build, create, and update responsive and adaptive layouts. So I'm going to look at the two assignments here. We're going to focus on the two assignments that you have for the instruction. You have the autogram assignment. I'm going to click on that one first. We're going to talk about a few things. So there aren't any screenshots that you need to include this week. There is the section for the questions. All of these answers are in the textbook. There's one that you'll do a little research on that's not specifically in the textbook. You could still probably answer it just based on the information, but I want you to research that one a little bit. But otherwise they're pretty straightforward. As long as you're following the tasks, you should come across these answers while you're doing the work. So I would read through them so you have them in the back of your mind, and then as you're working through the tasks, answer them as you go along. The other big thing with this one is you're going to be adding in an appropriate HTML or CSS comment that identifies the task in the textbook. Now, the reason that we're not needing to do a bunch of screenshots is because most of your work is going to be evident by what you turn in. However, as we add more code to these, the codes can kind of be hard to follow along. You don't always put them in the same places. And also I want to make sure that when you're doing something such as with the CSS comments, that you're describing or identifying the task. So I want to know what the CSS rule that you add does. It doesn't need to be real lengthy, and I'm going to show you examples, but this is good for you so that you're not just looking at the code, typing it in, and then not even thinking about what it's doing. So that's the explanation part is only for the CSS, and then the HTML is just to show me where at in your structure that your code is. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So from there, again, we have this troubleshooting section. This is only if you're not able to complete a task. If you work through everything and you get the same result as what I'll show you in my example, you've done everything, you think you've done everything just fine, then you don't need that section. So the only thing that you'll have on your document this week are these questions. And then of course you're going to want to zip up your module project and attach it, and you'll notice that it has a different name. So right here in the first instruction, I tell you that I want you to start making a copy of your previous module. So I'll show you what that looks like. I still have my autogram project files within the front end dev books, and that's a long name. You can rename that if you want, but if you want to follow the book, that's how they have it. But right here you can see that all I did was right click on autogram, which it was named just autogram before. I renamed it to 02 to go with module 2, and then I made a copy of it and I named the new one autogram 3, and that's what I've opened up in Atom, and that's the one that I'm working on, and that's the one that you would want to turn in. You just right click it, go to send to, and then it's the compressed zip folder that you're going to attach. And the reason I'm having you do this is so that you always have that copy to go back to if you need. You're going to be building upon things, and so it's always a good idea to have a practice. Now when we go to GitHub and you can do forks or branches, it's not going to be so much of an issue there. But you'll also see in your assignments the discussion has to do with working with your group and working through some of the challenges at the end of chapter 5. And so that one is important as well, that you make a copy of the autogram 3, rename it something like autogram challenges, chapter 5 challenges, whatever you want to name, but just make sure that you're making those changes to a different copy. So once you've done that, you're ready to go ahead and start your browser sync. So I've pulled my command prompt open using the start menu, and the first thing I need to do is navigate to the proper directory of where I have my project folder, where I have my autogram folder located. So just to show you what that looks like, my path up here of course goes from the Nikki directory to the advanced web design and then the front end dev book. So I'm going to type that in and go to that directory. This is what my code should look like. Take note of the O3 added to the end. So you can see my code here. I'm in the right directory, and now we need to start browser sync. The code for that is in your textbook. If you're using the print version, it's at the top of page 68. Keep in mind, if Google is your default browser, you don't need to include the -- browser with the Google Chrome in parentheses. Everything else is the same. So I'll type that in for you so you can just reference. So this is exactly what you should be typing in as shown in the book if Chrome is your default. This asterisk here is the wildcard for all HTML files, and then of course we had to include style sheets with a / because we have the style sheet folder. If we look at our Atom, right here is the style sheets. Also, one thing I wanted to mention is last week I believe that I had my fonts folder outside of the style sheets folder. So just double check that. The way that we added the way that you in the instructions add in the CSS styles for the fonts, it's going to be needed to be located in here for those to take effect. So one thing you want to just double check. So if we've done everything correct in here, I push enter, it should start Autogram, and it has. You'll notice, just double check your fonts. Like I said, this is what you should be seeing by the end of chapter 5. You won't see a huge this is in desktop view, keep in mind. One of the things that you're going to be doing in the instructions, and one thing you have to report on, is using the developer tools with the device mode, and that's basically referring to being able to simulate your project in a smartphone or a tablet in a mobile type device that's smaller than the desktop. And where that's at, where you activate that, is right here over here on the toggle device toolbar. So if I click on or click it off, it's going to go back to desktop. This is set to responsive. As you can see up at the top, I have my handles here that I can drag it, and this is how you want to test your responsiveness. You can see that those thumbnails should be in the desktop view off to the side. We haven't added any JavaScript yet, but you should be getting your a similar display when you go down into the phone view for these images at this point. So this will help you kind of see or test what you have before you turn it in. Now, let's look at the code. I'm not going to go through. The purpose of this is not for me to walk you through these steps. That is what you need to be doing in the textbook. However, in regards to the comments, let's look at that. And I'm perfectly fine. One of the reasons that I do provide these code examples is for you to compare. If you're having an issue that you can't resolve, come in here, take a look. I usually scroll from the top to the bottom if you need to pause your video. As long as you guys are not sharing code or copying and pasting from any source, you're actually going to the textbook. I don't mind if you use my code as an example. So that's for the HTML file. If we go over here to the right to the CSS and I go to the top, should be the examples of the CSS code that you should be seeing. Please take note of the organization, and then what we're going to look at now are the code requirements. So you can see over here on my index, which actually before I do that, let's go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the CSS. You'll notice that there's CSS comments over here as well. So if you forgot how to enter those, these are the syntax for that. You'll notice that the media queries are at the bottom. Put your media queries at the bottom and go ahead and make a section for them to make them easy to follow. But let's go back over to the HTML file on the left. So I told you if when you're adding or completing a task in the textbook that I want some kind of note above your code. So this would be a great example. The first task is to add in the detail image. And so all you really need to do for this one is just put it above that block of code. So this will help me when I go to grade, that I can easily get to that, make sure that you did everything correctly, and give you feedback on anything that might be changed or need changing. So if we're looking at the CSS, you'll notice the different syntax, but I also want on some of these where it makes sense, where it's appropriate, that you actually add in a description of what it's doing. So on line 68 here, you'll see a CSS comment, and it's right above this display property. And so that's related to one of the questions that you have this week. But this basically, by changing that display property, you're removing the line break and you're allowing the thumbnails to line up in a row. That's basic verbiage directly from the textbook, so you really shouldn't have much difficulty in determining what these different CSS rules are. I just want you to take note of it. I want you to have an understanding of what it's doing. And so I don't want you to spend hours writing me novels here. All I'm looking for is a basic description of what is going on here. For instance, on line 62 to 64, This particular CSS property and property values is what is preventing the wrapping and allowing of the scrolling for the list or the thumbnail list classes. So if we come over here and we look for thumbnail list, everything has an appropriate class that's going to tell us what it's in reference to. So we can go directly to, here's a thumbnail list here on item 15, and if we look at that, we can relate it directly to what you're seeing in the browser. And so these are some of the things as you go along: save your changes regularly, update your browser, troubleshoot, or see. Make sure that when you add in that media query that it lines up the thumbnails horizontally, that you're understanding. That also shows you what you need to be putting in your comments. Let's go ahead and click over to the second assignment. This is another it's going to be done within one of these discussions. You want to make sure you take note of the group that you were assigned to last week, because you're going to stay with the same group until at least midterms. I'm just still kind of evaluating that process. But you have two tasks in this discussion, and you'll notice that this task goes for the duration of Module 3 and 4, and so it'll be over the next 2 weeks. One of your tasks is to research either one of the resources that are provided in the textbook for Flexbox, and they're located down here under the additional resources on the lesson content learning activities page. The other option that you can do is look for your own useful resource. So ideas of that: find a website with code examples, find maybe a one-page cheat sheet, those kind of things. Something that would be useful to your team is what I'm looking for there. Then the next part, which is really the part that's going to span over the next 2 modules, is you're all going to tackle the bronze and the gold challenge at the end of chapter 5, and really all you're doing is using this discussion to communicate with your team members. You're going to report any issues that you encounter. If you have questions, you're going to ask your teammates, and the goal is that you all work through to where every single person in your group, and these are pretty small groups, so it shouldn't be too time consuming, but just help one another and talk through these. If you're all able to work through them and complete them without any assistance from one another, great. Talk about what you learned from it. Is there something useful? I give you some ideas down here. So there's really this is flexible to really work with whatever occurs while you guys are working through these challenges. You do need to include a final post, and that's just to report to me the progress your group made. Did you all work through it? Did you all encounter problems? If you all worked through it just fine and didn't even need each other, was it even you? But I do expect that you stay engaged in the conversation and you do more than just check in once a week. You guys need to be checking if people are leaving questions, that you're answering them, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the challenge, the final post is due by February 15th, so that's the end of Module 4. I will come in and determine what team I think did the best, which team made the most progress, which team communicated the best, which team worked together, and I will be giving every person who's an active participant. If you choose not to participate, you won't get any points, but if you're an active participant and you're part of that winning group, I will give you all 2 points extra credit. So just something to keep in mind. And I think that really is everything that you need to do to get started. Make sure that you're looking at the example here, that your end result looks like this. You should have a scrollable bar over here. You should, when you go into device mode, again, your thumbnail images should respond. You should have organized code in here. One thing with the Atom text editor is you'll notice that I'm using 2 different panes here. I've split the pane up, and the way that I did that is, if you're using a Windows, it is Control Shift and then P for Command Palette. And if you search for, which that actually brings up a lot of different things that you can do in the Command Palette, but one of them that I will share this week is the splitting of the pane. And if you just search for split, you can go up, down, left, or right. I chose the right option. And you'll notice that it split it into 2 so that I can pull up 2 different files, work on them the same, but also know that you can grab these and you can move them elsewhere. If you keep an eye out where that little gray, you can kind of see it's grayed out, a grayed out box. You can even open another pane here. You can take one that's existing, you can move it to the bottom, you can move it back, So there's really 4 panes to work with here. So keep that in mind, just something useful. As you find or discover those things out, share them with your team members. This is the type of thing in your small working groups to where you can learn from one another. So have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.